Hi Bible Art Journalers. At our Vacaville Bible Art Journaling Collaborative meetup in May, we are going over some techniques for some abstract watercolor flowers and also how to draw some gems and then color them in with watercolor. The watercolor techniques we're using today are going to be ones that, if you've watched the watercolor 1 and 2 videos, you'll see that I use the techniques that I taught in those videos with these flowers. So it's good to just understand some of those basic techniques. So if you haven't watched those videos, you may want to before you dive into this. Otherwise, I'll kind of be mentioning the techniques as I go. The nice thing about these abstract watercolor flowers is that you don't have to be able to draw a detailed flower in order for your brain to sort of take what's on the page, and it wants to give meaning to it. And so that's the beauty of watercolor, is just these splotches and blotches on the page can actually create an illusion for your mind of flowers. And so it's really hard to mess it up, and so that's why they're fun to make. I normally would do this on dictionary pages like we do in our practice at the group, but I thought with the video that it might be harder to see or distracting with the words, so I'm just using a mixed media art tablet. I'm actually at a conference with my husband, and he has gotten me a new tripod. So if you've watched my past videos, they have not always had the whole page on. I've been working on learning this process of videoing and what's the best setup, and so I'm very thankful for my new tripod that's letting you see the whole page and hopefully not a bunch of other distracting things. The fact that I'm away from home, I don't have all my normal supplies, so like I'm using the hairdryer from the hotel to dry my pages. It's kind of fun for me to journal while I'm away, and so I thought, why not try shooting some videos? I'm using my Ganzi Tombi watercolors. They're more of an artist grade set, and they're very rich and vibrant. I typically teach using the Artist Loft watercolors, but I just happened to have these with me this time, and I thought I'd go ahead and show you how the color lays down with them. I have 2 cups of water, one for rinsing my brush and one for adding clean water. So the first flowers that I'm going to do really are just using watercolor. There's no pencil sketching in before. You won't be doing any outlining afterwards, just watercolor. So these are probably the least detailed of the flowers we'll do. First, I'm going to just make some circles on my page with some water so that I can use a wet on wet technique for this. And since I'm working fairly quickly, I'm just going to go ahead and do all 3 little circles. And then I'm just going to drop in some of this yellow. Trying to leave a little bit of white space. We talked about that for highlight. And then we've also talked about the fact that if you want something to look natural, we typically don't see in nature one flat color, so I'm going to go ahead and add in a couple other shades of yellow. Just drop some in, and it doesn't really matter where you add this in. Do one more color. You just want to remember that with watercolor you don't want a harsh edge or line, and so like where I dropped those in and they stayed kind of looking like polka dots, I just want to blend it out a little bit. Because it's still wet, I'm going to go ahead and get some of my green, and I'm just going to touch the bottom here, and you can see how it starts to bloom up into that water on the page, and I might have to touch it a couple spots. but it's going to keep spreading because the watercolor wants to go where water is. And then I'm just going to drag down to get some stems. So this is a very simple technique where it didn't take really any drawing ability in order to do this. And that's the idea behind these flowers. It's just to kind of have fun, and however they turn out, they turn out. I'm going to dry my brush on a paper towel and just get a very little bit of water into my paint. And maybe a little bit lighter color. And then with this dry brush, I'm just going to, drier brush I should say, it's not completely dry, I'm just going to kind of pull some grass like from the bottom here. Remember, when you're using a lot of water, the color will spread more easily, but when you use a dry brush, you kind of get this scratchy look, which if you want that kind of texture, that's a good place to use it in the grass. So I'm going to blow dry this really quick so that I can move on to the next flower. The blow dryer definitely takes longer than my heat gun. So now we're going to do some kind of puddle flowers. If you think back to drawing flowers for kindergarten, you probably put some petals. You want to try and use probably five petals. They don't have to be even in size, just so they all connect. And I'm filling in, again, this is a wet on wet technique, I'm just filling in my petals with water, and then I'm going to drop in some paint. Nature tends to be uneven, so we do a lot of things in 5s and 3s. I'm going to go ahead and drop in a couple other colors of red, just to give it a little variety we talked about. That nothing in nature is one flat color when we look at it. I'm not too worried about filling in the center because I'll show you what we're going to do there. So I'm just dropping in some color. And then for the center, I'm going to use my black, and I'm just going to drip in a little spot like that in the center. So then I'm just going to actually use the bloom of the paint as it moves through the water to give the shape. Now I'm going to move to another part of the paper that's not touching this, because remember what I'm going to want this flower to dry completely before I do something against the edge of it, or my next flower will bleed into this paint. So I think I'm going to try some different things. This one will be wet on dry. And I kind of laid down the outer edge, and then I just put more water on my brush, and I'm pulling the paint in towards the center. Okay. So on this one, to get a gradation of color, instead of adding 3 different colors, I just only put paint around the edge, and then I use that paint to pull in towards the middle. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my same, dripping in a little black in the center. See, isn't this easy? Anybody can do this. Again, this one is a wet on dry. This one I'll go ahead and drop in a couple other little bits of blue. Okay, I'll go back to a wet on wet technique. So you can do the defined petals or you can just kind of make a blob. So this one I'm doing very much a blob. Just kind of getting the water on the page. And add some yellow. And this one, my center all ran downhill. Since it's still wet, I can just pick it up like that with the paper towel. Add a little more water. Put my blue back in. Oh, see, it's pretty forgiving if it's not dry yet. So then if I feel like I have a little too much water on there, I can just touch my paper towel there. Maybe not press it quite as hard as I did, which lifted all the color. Then we'll try that again. Maybe this time it won't move quite as far. And then for this one, I think I'm just gonna kind of drop in a different color for that one. This one still damp, so I don't want to get close to it. Okay, this time it's, again, I'm going to use that same wet on dry technique that I did with the orange flower. I have to be very careful not to touch here or they will run together because they're not dry yet. Some clean water on my brush and I'm just going to pull that color into the center. Going right there, trying not to touch the orange, but get my purple flower a little bigger. This one I'm going to offset the center a little. Oh, I like the way the paint is running, it's so cool. I think I'm going to go ahead and dry these so that I can do some flowers touching now. So remember when you're testing to make sure if your paint is dry, you want to touch it. If it feels cold to the touch, it is still damp and so it'll still pull color from whatever you put next to it. If I want to leave the center white, you definitely have to use a wet on dry technique because if there was water in this center part, it would the paint would pull into where it's wet. So because I used a wet on dry technique with this flower, I can probably manage to keep that white space open. Now I'll keep a really defined spot there, you'll see, because it's not bleeding into the other paint. Just kind of trying to give a variety of techniques on this one page so that you can see. I'm not putting a lot of thought into where I'm dripping paint in. It's very random. I don't want you to think you have to copy exactly, you know, each step of what I'm doing, because it really is random. And they just do come out looking very abstract, but they look like flowers. And that's the beauty of this, and not really making mistakes, just playing around. Just letting the paint run. In a couple of these where I really had too much water on there, you can see how it's just kind of running away. There we go. And I can always come back in here if I want this more defined or darker. I can always come back and add a little more if I wanted. Okay, again, I have to be really careful not to touch there because that flower is still wet. Again, when you're dropping those three colors in, you kind of want to stay within the same color family, or something that's analogous, that's not going to create mud. We talk about that in another video about mixing colors and how you don't want to pick things opposite each other on the color wheel because they will make brown when you put them together. It's okay if they overlap a little, as long as they're, you know, the one you're going over, this flower is completely dry. That's why I can go over. And the paint may reactivate a little bit with the water in the new paint. So now I'm just going to do some leaf shapes. Again, I can just come in and lay down some water. It's basically just trying not to touch these flowers here because they're still a little bit damp. Again, really random how I'm placing it in there. It's probably actually, my water's kind of dirty, but I'm thinking it's probably a little easier for you to see where I'm laying water down. And since it's kind of a greenish tint, it's not going to affect the paint. So I'm just going to kind of come in and do 3 little leaves right there. And I'm just sort of making rounded edge triangles to just go in the space between the flowers there fill it in. That's what's kind of determining the shape. Is like, oh, well, that's the space I have, so now I'll kind of just make a rounded triangle in that space. Got quite a bit of water on there. Might soak a little up before I drop in the next color. Handy dandy paper towels. And you just want to kind of drip those second and third colors in and not really mix and mix. If you overwork it, it'll just become one color again. And so it's good to keep in mind that when you drop in the other color, you can let the paint kind of mix on its own, but you don't want to push it around too much. Just kind of drip it in. I'm going to go right up to the edge of these so that my leaves aren't floating in space. That's another technique that I will show you at some point in these is a watercolor technique where you do sections and you don't allow them to touch, and so that's a whole different look. That's not what we're going for here. So again, I'm switching back and forth between wet on wet, wet on dry. So I said you really can't mess this one up. Just keep making blobs until your page is full. So look at that. You didn't draw a thing. You just painted some circles, some very basic petal shapes, some curvy triangles, and you have a watercolor flower page, and it looks pretty awesome. You can do this.